Hi, I'm Rick Steves. Thanks for joining me on a visit to Europe's greatest palace, the Palace of Versailles. If you've ever wondered why your American passport has French writing on it, you'll find the answer at the Chateau of Versailles.
Timed entry line.
Around 1700, Versailles was the cultural heartbeat of Europe, and France was at its zenith. Throughout Europe, when you said the king, you were referring to the French king, Louis XIV. Every king wanted a palace like Versailles. Everyone learned French. French taste in clothing, hairstyles, table manners, theater, music, art, and kissing spread across the continent. That cultural dominance continued to some extent right up to the 20th century. Today, if you're planning to visit just one palace in all of Europe, make it Versailles. This place is huge. Then there's the vast courtyard in front, where we stand with the mobs of tourists. There's the golden royal gate in front of the palace. Well, it's actually a replica of the original. This gate stretches nearly 260 feet. It's adorned with 100,000 gold leaves. All in all, the complex of Versailles covers about 2,000 acres. That's more than twice the size of New York's Central Park. The Palace of Versailles was home to the kings of France for one glorious century, roughly from 1680 to 1792. It all got its start as a tiny hunting lodge in what was then a swampy forest outside of Paris. You can see the ghost of that original lodge today. Direct your attention to the very center of the palace, the section with the clock. That central part was once a hunting lodge. See the 3 arched windows beneath the clock? That was the private bedroom of Louis XIV. Think how busy this courtyard must have been 300 years ago. There were as many as 5,000 nobles here at any one time, each with an entourage. Carried by their servants in sedan chair taxis, they'd buzz from games to parties to amorous rendezvous. Servants ran around delivering secret messages and roast legs of lamb. Horse-drawn carriages clattered through the fancy gate with their finely dressed passengers. They drove up the broad boulevard that ran directly from Paris. The horse stables still line the boulevard. Incredible as it seems, both the grounds and most of the palace were public territory, where even the lowliest peasant could come to gawk, so long as they followed a dress code. Then, as now, there were hordes of tourists, pickpockets, palace workers, and men selling wind-up children's toys.
Once upon a time, there was a great and glorious king.
I had a vision, a dream about a palace.
Versailles. I am about to drag this country out of the darkness and into the light.
He sees Versailles and nothing else. He's forgotten who built this country.
I acted for France because I am France!
Bow to your king.
You'll pass through about a dozen forgettable rooms. You'll pass by old paintings of French kings and paintings of Versailles itself as it grew from a hunting lodge to the massive complex it is today. 3 kings lived at Versailles during its century of glory: Louis XIV, XV, and XVI. The palace was built by Louis XIV in the 1680s in the forests and swamps of Versailles, which is about 10 miles west of Paris. Louis called himself the Sun King because he gave life and warmth to all that he touched. Versailles became the personal temple of this god on earth, decorated with statues and symbols of Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, and of Louis himself. The classical themes underlined the divine right of France's kings and queens to rule without limit. For 72 years, Louis was the perfect embodiment of the absolute monarch. He summed it up best himself with his famous rhyme, "L'État, c'est moi." The state, that's me. France's monarchy was crumbling, and the time was ripe for a strong leader to reestablish the old feudal order. They didn't get one. Instead, they got Louis XVI, a shy, meek bookworm, married to a sweet girl from the Austrian royal family, Marie Antoinette. Together, they retreated into the idyllic gardens of Versailles and watched as France exploded into revolution. In the chaos, the monarchy was overthrown. Louis and Marie Antoinette were arrested and executed, and Versailles was transformed from a center of power into a tourist attraction. The Royal Chapel. Da-da-da-da! Every morning at 10 o'clock, the organist and musicians struck up the music. These big golden doors opened, and Louis XIV and his family walked through to attend Mass. While Louis sat here on the upper level and looked down on the golden altar, the lowly nobles below knelt with their backs to the altar and looked up, worshiping Louis, worshiping God. The Hercules Drawing Room. In Louis's house, pleasure ruled. The main banquets, balls, and receptions were held in this room. Picture elegant partygoers in fine silks, wigs, rouge, lipstick, and fake moles, and that's just the men, as they dance to the strains of a string quartet. The room's columns, arches, and frieze match the height and style of Veronese's painted architecture, which makes the painting an extension of the room. Pretty nifty. For another illusion, look up at the ceiling. It looks like the roof is opening right up to the heavens. The ceiling painting of Hercules being crowned a god gives the room its name. As you wander, the palace feels bare, but remember that entire industries were created just to furnish and decorate the place with carpets, mirrors, furniture, and tapestries. The Salon of Abundance. If the party in the Hercules room got too intense, you could always step in here for some refreshments. Silver trays were loaded up with liqueurs, exotic stimulants like coffee, juice, chocolates, and, on really special occasions, 3-bean salad. Unfortunately, most of the palace's original furniture was lost in the Revolution. Louis himself was a gracious host who enjoyed letting his hair down at night. If he took a liking to you, he might sneak you through those doors over there in the middle of the wall and into his own private study, or cabinet of curiosities. There he'd show off his collection of dishes, medals, jewels, and the Monalisa, which hung on his wall. Louis's favorite show-and-tell items are now in the Louvre. The Diane Room. Here in the billiards room, Louis and his men played on a table that stood in the center of the room while ladies sat surrounding them on Persian carpet cushions and music wafted in from the next room. Louis was a good pool player. He was also a sore loser, and, being king, he rarely lost. The famous bust of Louis by Bernini in the center shows a handsome, dashing 27-year-old playboy king. His gaze is steady amid his wind-blown cloak and hair. Young Louis loved life. He hunted animals by day, noticed Diana the Huntress on the ceiling, and chased beautiful women at night. Games were actually an important part of Louis's political strategy, known as the domestication of the nobility. By distracting the nobles with the pleasures of courtly life, he was free to run the government his way. Billiards, dancing, and concerts were popular, but the biggest distraction was gambling, usually a card game similar to blackjack. Louis lent money to the losers, making them even more indebted to their king. The Mars Room. Also known as the Guard Room, as this was the room for the king's Swiss bodyguards, it's decorated with a military flair. Check out the ceiling. There's Mars, the Greek god of war, in a chariot pulled by wolves. But it's not all war. The painting of David playing his harp is a reminder that Louis loved music and played his guitar or enjoyed a concert here nearly every evening. The Mercury Room. Louis's life was a work of art, and Versailles was the display case. Everything he did was a public event designed to show his subjects how it should be done. This room served as Louis's official, but not actual, bedroom, where the Sun King would rise as a ritual each morning to warm his subjects. From a canopied bed, similar to the one you see here today, Louis would get up, dress, and take a seat for morning prayer. Meanwhile, the nobles would stand behind a balustrade, awestruck by his piety, nobility, and clean socks. At breakfast, they murmured with delight as their king deftly decapitated his boiled egg with a knife. And when Louis went to bed at night, the dukes and barons would fight over who got to hold the candle while he slipped into his royal jammies. Here in the home of the Sun King, bedtime, wake-up, and meals were all public rituals. The Apollo Room. This was the grand throne room. Louis held court from a 10-foot-tall silver-canopied throne on a raised platform placed in the center of this room. Notice the metal rings in the ceiling that once supported the canopy. Everything in here reminds us that Louis XIV was not just any ruler, but the Sun King, who lit the entire world with his presence. At night, they often held parties in this room, actually dancing around the throne. Louis, who was 63 when this was painted, had more than 300 wigs like this one. He changed them several times a day. This fashion was born as Louis's hairline began to recede. It then spread all over Europe and even to the American colonies in the days of George Washington. The War Room. Louis XIV was addicted to wars, and France's success made other countries jealous and nervous. The stucco relief on the wall shows Louis on horseback, triumphing over his fallen enemies.